Right here, we're at the CPAC event with the mighty Bill Spadia. Right here, Bill Spadia, New Jersey, has over 1.2 million listeners a day, every day, Monday through Friday, from 6 to 10 a.m. So I have a special on-location podcast station for these videos today, and we're going to talk about how to become a multi-millionaire in 10 years. Now, before I get into like specifics of that, let's just kind of look at what is, I'm not going to say the simple approach, but the disciplined approach. If you have a long-term viewpoint and you want it to be slow and steady, you could always buy 3 or 4 different, maybe 5 different real estate investments every single year for the next 10 years. No one is saying quit your day job to do it, right? So if we talk about real estate, we know that you get 4 different rates of return off the same dollar: cash flow, mortgage interest write-off, depreciation, and last but not least, if you're going to buy a property today, sell it 10, 20 years in the future, you think it's going to be higher. That's what all the books are, Have It All, or Rich Dad, Poor Dad, or Real Estate Riches, Grant Cardone. That's what they talk about. They've become millionaires, multimillionaires, some of them hundreds of approaching to billion-dollar status. That's phenomenal. But now there's the person out there that doesn't want to buy real estate, that doesn't want to rely on people to pay the rent. And this is the person that is going to kind of look at the marketplace after they first have to develop a product that creates or closes the gap that other products in its industry and or something new within an industry hasn't seen yet. So if you're going to develop a product, right, you got to really kind of put yourself in a position with all other folks that are in that industry of the product that you're looking to develop. Brainstorm with those folks, learn what they're talking about, see what they're doing, and then begin the process of making sure that whatever you build brings more value than anyone that would be your competitors that are specific to that product, specific to that market, in closing the gap. So it's not just about the product being built, but it's also about that you're going to create more value to where they become raving fans of yours, not necessarily, you just build something cool and it's one and done. And last but not least, what you really want to be able to do is constantly and never-ending check on the product, check on its viability, always be innovative, and always stay a step ahead by anticipating and really being able to figure out that there's always going to be someone on the come up going to try and do what you're doing. They're going to try and steal your intellectual property. So by creating raving fans, by providing more value than everybody else in your product that's closing the gap in an industry that hasn't seen it yet, well, that's a good way to really find yourself in a different space and be able to take advantage of it. So I think of Steve Jobs, 1975. Steve W., his partner, the genius actually behind Apple. Steve Jobs is really the marketing genius, but the technological genius was Steve W. I can't pronounce his last name, so I'm going to keep it simple. I think it's Wozniak. Anyway, the point is he understood the interface. He understood how the computer worked. They both had experience at Hewlett-Packard, and they both had experience at Atari. And what happened as Wozniak was able to build this model, this interface, in the garage of Steve Jobs, we hear about this all the time, that was the product that was closing the gap. They could type something and see it on the screen, and that was almost like, the equivalent of if a caveman saw a cell phone out of nowhere, it would be like it was an aha moment, right? Maybe not a cell phone, but a wheel. So long story endless, in that space, in the garage, they build out 40 of these. After they build out 40, there's a local technology store. By the way, it was halfway built. One of the things that Steve Jobs did up until the day he passed away, and it still happens every time you buy an Apple product, is when they package it so well that the look of it feels really good. Never mind the fact that internally and externally it's phenomenal, but the look of it feels really good. So go to 1975, Steve Jobs inside the garage with Steve W. and a couple other buddies who he later bounced out when it was all said and done anyway. They build this 40 different computers. They take it to the local store, and the gentleman gives them money in advance for these computers, by the way. The guy sells them. The next thing you know, because of the packaging and it wasn't fully complete, they then get this 1975, a $400,000 cash injection. So right now it's 2023, 1975 to 2000 is 25 years plus another 45 years. So 48 years ago, do the math. 48 years ago, they got $400,000. $400,000. If I was to look at inflation at 4%. That would be times 3, so 4 to 8 to, that would be the equivalent of getting $3.2 million in today's dollars that he received after the garage invention of these 40 Apple Ones. Next thing you know, at the technology conference in Vegas in '76, That's when the Apple II came out. It looked much different. Once again, there was raving fans that were created. He was a massive disruptor that went against status quo. Yes, a massive disruptor that went against status quo with integrity, some say not. At the end of the day, in closing and in final thought, as a result of that, what began to happen is the audience kept coming back, and Steve Jobs, that brother he was just thinking of new shit all the time. He didn't stop thinking. So he wasn't satisfied with the Apple I into the Apple II, going from being worth $1 million to $10 million to $100 million. Then all of a sudden the company goes public. He brings in all people that weren't there from the beginning. So I always hear, if you want to become the CEO, you got to get rid of the hustler in you. So he wanted to become, or was told to become the CEO. He brought in a board of directors, some guy that ran a Pepsi company that was selling sugar water, who later almost put Apple out of business and was instrumental of getting Steve Jobs kicked out of the company. And this was after the Macintosh came on the scene in 1984. Apple I, Apple II made millions, a publicly traded company. Once again, they lost the value of creating products that were better than their competition. They became too corporate. And once again, we're talking about how to become a multimillionaire in 10 years. But what happened there is they lost what got them there. And eventually Steve Jobs in 1985 got ousted. So now as we talk about becoming a multimillionaire, I'm going to weave in and out of industries and still tell the Steve Jobs story. So once again, if you're a real estate person, right, and now all of a sudden you're buying properties every year and, you have good control, you still have your day job, you're not trying to hit a home run right away, your rent rolls are okay, you have a good team around you, that's going to create that. Let's say if you own a candy store, you figured out a niche and you know how to multiply that candy store, you're going to do well and maybe become a multimillionaire if you keep playing the game of replacement. If I go back to Steve Jobs and I stay within the place of 1985, remember Apple I, Apple II, Macintosh, they built a movement. There was people that were like fans of Steve Jobs, right? He understood the power of the stage and the microphone, but he also wanted to make sure that whatever he built or whatever was going to come next was over the top valuable than anyone else in their industry. However, there was forces against him. Think of Star Wars, the evil empire. Think of Darth Vader, think of the Emperor versus, the Jedis. He was a Jedi. The corporate board was the evil empire. They ousted him. He then started a company called Next. It was a software company. And what Steve thought was that he was going to just replicate what he did at Apple, but the players that were together with him in 75 were all gone. Creative resentments. So it's almost like if you're in a real estate game and you normally bought 5 or 10 properties, now you're trying to buy 30 or 40, but bring in other people that the teamwork isn't there. That didn't happen for him. So Next kind of made a little bit of money, kind of, floated for the next 7, 8 years. But during that time, he started Pixar. Pixar is the cartoon movies that began to come out in the mid-90s, 10 years later. He put $10 million into Pixar. Eventually, he sold it for north of $1 billion, I believe. You could check the math on that when it came public, or $6 billion. I forget the numbers on that. And that was 10 years later when he came back into Apple. Apple at that point had 100 products. The people that fired him, they asked him to come back for 90 days. He systematically fired every last one of them. I love the story. I get chills thinking about it. Cut the products from 100 products to 4, and then created the iMac, where you could internally see what it looks like inside a computer, but now it's tied to the internet. How does that play into real estate? Stick with your core. Stick with your principles. Stick with what got you there. Stay with your fundamentals. And this is how you could create a multi-million-dollar business that has to tie into a multi-million-dollar mindset. And by the way, make sure you're surviving success along the way, because if you're not, and you try and go too fast, you try and climb up that mountain too fast, you could find yourself with no oxygen and not be able to make it on the way down when the wind is behind you and the friction is less. So understand to take it one day at a time. You have to be able to get leverage on yourself. You have to be able to understand what makes you tick. And oh, by the way, you may need help for someone to figure that out for you. Someone has to come in and disrupt that pattern, but it can only happen if you trust that somebody else. So go get a coach that's a proven winner. I have 3 of them now. I have 3 different coaches that are proven winners that I wouldn't be able to listen to somebody if I felt they hadn't been there, done that. So now all of a sudden, if they're going to disrupt my pattern because they have leverage, because they've built rapport with me, because they care about me, this once again ties into your business, ties into Steve Jobs, then and only then can that pattern get disrupted and replaced with an alternative. Disrupt the pattern, replace it with an alternative, And now all of a sudden, if you're a guy that or a gal that has 5 or 10 properties a year, but you want to take that next step because you emotionally can survive that financial success that's going to come from all the time and effort you have to put into it, because there's no such thing as an overnight success. It's 10 years in the making. Well, guess what? Those next elevation steps where you break through inertia and gravity is no longer holding you back is going to put you in a place to create generational wealth, help make the world a better place. Let's not keep the money like I did. 2008, 9, and 10, I bought a boxing promotional company, a gold chain, a Mercedes, and a house. And then in 2012, because I wasn't making any improvements on what got me there, because I was comfortable clinging to status quo and everybody telling me how great I was, I found myself in a position where I had to rebuild my business because my economic subconscious temperature told me that I didn't deserve it. So once again, this is about mental health. It's about understanding how to survive money, because money is a mindset. It's sticky, or it's the greatest elevation, especially if you use it as a tool to make things better, to help other people. And then what begins to happen is you elevate in ways that you never thought about. What does that mean about Steve Jobs? Boom, iMac 1997, iPod, iPad, iPhone, everything you can think of. He infected 4 industries: the phone, the movies, Pixar, right? He created the personal computer and destroyed it all at the same time over a 30-year period. And last but not least, the music industry. The brother, when I was coming up, I used to go to Tower Records to get records or buy CDs, not CDs, cassettes, and this was after the 8-tracks. If there was one song I liked on an album, I had to go buy the whole cassette. This brother came in and said, no, you could buy it for $1. It changed everything overnight. Just like that, the record industry didn't see it coming. Everything changed, and now from that point on, it's been a different game. There hasn't been any innovation since then. This was in 2001 or 2, I believe. It's now 2023. And at that point, or with that being said, Apple could find itself, if it's not careful. Remember, Harvard endowment's got more cash than Apple does, and Apple's got the most cash out of every corporation in the world. Harvard's got more money than that. Think about that. Think about that control. Think about what it's doing to your brain every day. That's another side note. We're talking about how to become a multimillionaire in the next 10 years. My point is, do a checkup from the neck up, surround yourself with people who've been there, done that, and learn how to survive that financial success. Anyway, go ahead and click that link below. Schedule time to sit down with one of the folks here at Epic. They'll take you through our success process, because as you prosper, you want to make sure you don't have an accountant but a tax strategist. You don't want to just have a fiduciary. You want to have a fiduciary that's tied to your estate attorney, that's tied to your insurance agent, that's tied to your trust officer, so you could have that fractional family office mindset all on the Epic Wealth Builder, where all of your financial data is on one landing page, integrated and coordinated on a daily basis. And all of this is for free. Go ahead and click the link. One of the members here will talk to you. And by the way, if you have any other questions, feel free to ask them. Or if there's other videos you want us to do, we would love to do it. And thanks for checking us out.